Why was Jesus born in Bethlehem? It's odd because growing up as a Christian, I could, as a child, probably name you two Jewish cities. It would have been Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And if you went and talked to a Jew, especially one that lived in and around the time of Jesus, and you asked him to name some cities, Bethlehem would not be the second one. It would probably be pretty far down the list. And that's because it wasn't really considered to be anything special. But as we know through the story of Jesus' birth, that's where God chose to be born. And it's quite odd because outside of its closeness to Jerusalem, it really wasn't that far on a map of ancient times. It didn't really have anything to offer. David, yeah, he was born there, but that's kind of like a celebrity being born in some small town in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's cool, and if you went to the people that lived in the town, they'd probably care about that fact. But as for us, we only really care about the celebrity that came out of it. In short, Bethlehem didn't have really anything to offer until the prophet Micah shows up on the scene. And the prophet Micah lived hundreds of years before Jesus, and he's prophesying against the people of Israel that God's going to decimate and destroy the promised land that he's given them. But then he gives this promise of hope, and he says this in Micah 5:2. It's a pretty famous verse. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephraim, are only a small village among all the people of Judah. Yet a ruler of Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come from you on my behalf. That small village, depending on the translation you read, it could actually be translated as insignificant, like totally not even on the map, basically. No one even really cares about you. And yet, I'm going to choose, this is what God's saying, I'm going to choose to make my Messiah come out of you. It's quite an odd thing. You know, if I'm God, I'm showing up at the biggest event in history where everyone can see me. I'm flown down from the heavens with lightning bolts coming out of my fingers. Yet Jesus decides to be born in the middle of nowhere as a baby to really poor people. It seems totally backwards from how we would do it. But here's why it's important. The first reason that I think it is important is that it confirms the importance of the line of David. Remember, God promised that David's throne would rule in Jerusalem forever. And this is really important because we're having this promise of destruction that's going to prohibit David's line from ruling. So there's going to be a lapse in time between David's last descendant ruling in Judah and the Messiah coming. So it's confirming this promise that God made to David about what his lineage would be. The second reason is that Bethlehem actually translates to town of bread, which is really interesting because Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And if we look at it as a metaphor, remember when the Israelites were walking through the desert, they received bread from heaven. It was a physical thing that they needed to sustain their physical life. But now Jesus is coming down as the spiritual bread to the town of bread to give spiritual bread for all of the world. It's quite an interesting. And the final reason that I think it's important that Jesus was born in Bethlehem is it shows the people a place to look. They probably assumed, the Israelites, that the Messiah would come from an Israelite tribe. That would have been the assumption they would be born in Israel, but they wouldn't know where to look. And if they hadn't had this prophecy about Bethlehem, they'd probably be looking in the wrong place. And we see that they're not. We see that the Israelites take this prophecy seriously in Matthew 2:5, when Herod is asking the Sanhedrin where the Messiah would be born, and the Sanhedrin were really high-ranking Jews. They said this, that in Bethlehem in Judah, they replied, for this is what the prophet written. And then they quoted Micah. So overall, it's so important because it gives people a place to look at where the Messiah is going to come, which further confirms that Jesus was the one that they were prophesying about in the first place. Thanks so much for watching. If this helps you understand a little bit more about the Bible, then be sure to leave a like on this video as it really does help the channel. And I'll see you back here tomorrow as we continue to read through Scripture together.